Great, we're recording. All right, good morning, everyone. It is 8:35 a.m. on Tuesday, July 11th, 2023. This is the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee, and we have a quorum. Mr. Price, can we start off with a roll call, please?
Yes. Brent Rubin.
Here.
Deborah Carpenter.
Present.
Jasmine Anderson. Jerry Hawkins. Krista Nightingale. Linda McMahon.
Here. 1 second.
Lynette Aguilar. Matt Houston. Peter Goldstein.
Here.
Roy Lopez. Nathaniel Barrett. Jennifer Scripps.
Present.
Joe Cannon.
Present.
Colin Yarbrough.
Present.
Maureen Milligan.
Present.
That's 8. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Price. We have a new member this morning, Maureen Milligan, so I just wanted to welcome her to the committee. Maureen, would you like to briefly introduce yourself to everyone?
Good morning. Happy to be joining the club and have a lot of experience being at City Hall. Sorry, I'm not able to be there today, but my background is in housing and economic development, and I'm happy to be of service.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Milligan. And just a friendly reminder to everyone online that in order to comply with the Open Meetings Act, you have to have your camera on throughout the meeting, and to count towards our quorum, you have to have our camera on. So if anyone has their camera off, please do turn it on now. And I see Mr. Barrett is now here at 8:37, so let's note that for the record. We had a couple folks sign up to speak online, so I just wanted to check in real quick to see if they're here. It was Barbara Alfaro and Veronica Alonso. Are either of them online? Okay. All right, thanks so much. And we don't have anyone here from the public here in the Horseshoe who's come to speak. So let's turn it over to Mr. Agu for the Forward Dallas Urban Design Plan Review.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. With me today is one of our consultants or part of the consultant team, Rick Leisner from the Norse Design Group, and he'll be helping to present the urban design elements that we'll be talking through. So today is going to be multiple parts with our discussion. One, we're going to talk through the community and urban design implementation strategies, basically picking up from the last conversation we had regarding implementation. We're going to focus just on urban design today. Secondly, we're going to touch on the urban design elements, giving an overview of what those are and how they relate to land use in Forward Dallas. And then thirdly, we're going to basically show an example of how urban design is going to be intertwined with land use, future land use, and how we're going to be able to use that with Forward Dallas. So 3 parts of the presentation. After that, we'll go into discussion and talk through next steps. Okay. All right, so like I mentioned, this is going to be one of the themes that we are talking or developing through the plan, focusing just on community and urban design. And before I delve into that, I know we touched on this last time. I just want to do a quick reminder in terms of the structure of the implementation strategies within Forward Dallas. So they're broken up into 3 kind of buckets. First, we're going to talk about the goal of the particular approach or strategy. It's usually broad and general. Aspirational is what this goal usually is crafted to be, and this is the theme purpose that we have for this particular strategy. Secondly, we're going to delve into more precise and measurable objectives. That's going to stem from the goal. And then thirdly, the action items, that basically recommendations on how we accomplish the objectives that are part of the goal. So I just want to quickly remind everybody in terms of when we talk about goals, objectives, action items, I want to make sure we're on the same page with definitions and how they work together. All right, so the draft goal for urban design, community and urban design, is basically to establish a design vision for public and private spaces in Dallas, focusing on how different spaces, different places, districts, streets, and open spaces should grow, change, and/or improve through the intentional use of design. So this next page has a bunch of content. We'll talk through it too. So like I mentioned, each goal within the implementation strategy of Forward Dallas has a grouping of objectives, and underneath those objectives have certain action steps. So as we talk through this, make sure to take any notes, jot down any questions, because we're going to go through all of these and then come back for Q&A and discussion. So for community and urban design, objective number 1 is to develop a citywide urban design vision and guidelines. And to get there, basically, after post-Forward Dallas, we want to make sure we develop guidelines that are more specific in terms of how buildings relate to the street, specific heights for certain types of development. We want to make sure we create a comprehensive citywide urban design guideline for the city that integrates existing urban design resources. So we have a bunch of piecemeal urban design guidance in the city, but they don't work to kind of tell and craft a comprehensive vision as the City of Dallas needs for just kind of understanding what the entirety of the city needs to look like from an urban design perspective. So this particular objective is to develop a comprehensive urban design guideline for the city. Second objective is to integrate and implement urban design standards into the development process and future planning efforts. So currently, when our team goes through looking at particular development cases that come through, there isn't a set design guideline or criteria that we use to grade or review those particular projects. So this objective is talking through developing one that would help with, one, the development process, i.e. plats, zonings, development cases, but also, two, being able to develop one for future planning efforts, neighborhood plans that could be developed post-Forward Dallas, incorporating future land use visions into park master planning is another example step that we're looking to build upon within this objective. A few others touch on developing urban design criteria that can be used in the review of bond projects as well. So some of these items that we have here, a comprehensive urban design guidance isn't really used, or we don't really have one to be able to help with these particular items. So what we want to do is help to develop a set of standards that would help in these processes. And then thirdly, we want to promote and strengthen a sense of place and community identity for all Dallas neighborhoods. So within the City of Dallas, when somebody mentions a particular place or a particular type of environment or culture, those areas or geographies could be different for different people. So we want to make sure we develop a collaborative neighborhood planning process where all community stakeholders are able to define, envision, and evaluate the desired place that they want for their communities. And then two, this is more toward kind of the cultural identity within the city, is to review the mix of land uses and development codes within communities that have limited or low concentrations of dedicated cultural venues or publicly identified cultural assets to increase equitable access to these cultural experiences in the city. So right now, like I mentioned, looking throughout the entirety of the city, those areas are piecemeal and are not comprehensive in nature. So the idea within this particular objective is to make sure that we are providing and promoting a strong sense of place for all communities within the City of Dallas. So that's basically the breakdown of the objectives that we have for this particular goal. We'll come back and talk through each of those items after we finish our presentation. So I'm going to actually, from that, I'm going to transition to the next part of our presentation, which is delving into the different elements of urban design that we're going to be using to help build what we're trying to develop from our land use vision with Forward Dallas. So from that, I'm going to transition to our consultant, Rick Leisner, to pick up on the conversation.
Thanks, Lawrence. I really appreciate that. As far as when we start talking about urban design, it's basically a core belief that these are physical attributes of a community. You know, when you talk about land use, it's a land use. It can be proposed, it can be existing, but urban design elements are much more of a physical, tactile type of component within the community. Things that citizens typically can use, they can touch, they can walk, and it helps to define that sense of place. We use these items very much as it relates to placemaking. There's primarily 5 that we've identified, and these go back generations in essence as to the 5 core components that relates to urban design: paths, districts, landmarks, nodes, and natural features. In all of these, there can be some type of overlap. In essence, you can have landmarks that are natural features. You can have landmarks that are much more of a built environment, but there is some slight overlap in everything. But they, in essence, help establish that foundation set of community and urban design concepts. Let's first talk about paths. And again, this is a whole series of different components that allow people to move and enjoy and take in a community. They're pedestrian, they're transit related, they're related to streets, and many times these days we like to talk about streets as it relates to complete streets. In essence, we're talking about a network of paths and how these paths then connect and allow people to move and enjoy and take in a community. There's the functional aspects of movement as it relates to land use. Land use and urban design kind of relate completely, and they have kind of an intersection, and we'll be talking about that throughout the presentation here. And you can see again the whole set of examples that relates to paths. Districts. Many times in the city of Dallas, you can see that there are defined districts, defined neighborhoods, defined mixed-use areas, defined commercial corridors. Some of our districts are not as well defined, and we'll be talking about trying to create a greater sense of those definitions and everything. But again, they define an area to where they have a standard set of quality, an architectural connectivity. Many times there can also be a streetscape or natural set of elements that helps define these areas. They provide, these districts allow an area to be marketable within a particular function. So you can have conservation areas, you can have preservation areas, but also there can be urban areas, neighborhoods that can be unique and qualitative. And again, the examples for the city right now is a whole set of historic and conservation districts. Landmarks. Landmarks are critical to a community and actually help to define a wayfinding sense, a way that citizens, without really understanding how they're going from a point A to point B, they use landmarks to connect and move throughout a community, throughout a neighborhood. Landmarks are critical to that spatial identification and that movement process. And many times people, whether or not they know, they give a definition of moving from place to place through a connectivity through landmarks and everything. It helps to give a great sense of orientation to a visitor and to an actual resident and everything. In fact, we find out that many of our greatest places and components within a city are the landmarks within a community and a city. Nodes. Nodes are similar in essence to what you might think of a landmark, but they're also kind of a primary concentration point of activity. They can relate to land use, they can relate to density within a community. Nodes can have connectivity through transit, through automobile movement, but most importantly through pedestrian connectivity and activity. here through DART and the adjacent development, we're seeing all this different type of increased development as it relates to nodes and mixed-use development and more density and walkability. And then, of course, there's nodes as it relates to neighborhood centers, which provides kind of that node of commerce, that node of where people get together to exchange ideas and connectivity with neighbors. Natural features. Vitally important that we understand and protect our natural features within a community. Dallas is blessed with an abundant array of both water and green spaces and green components that help provide that system of ecological landforms here within the community. We use our natural features for connectivity. We use them for shade. One of the most important things here in Texas is to have shade, and our natural features provide that component, be it through vegetative components or, again, using water and landform. And again, the examples here, the floodplains in Dallas are vitally important. Creeks, tributaries, the escarpment area, and again, we have such a wonderful array and development of our parks and recreation system.
All right, thank you, Rick. So with that, what we're going to do now is, after we've talked through basically the suite of elements that are being used to identify or show urban design within the city, we're going to show an application of how we would like to use that within the Fort Dallas plan, and how the two land use and urban design elements work together to help inform what certain parts of the city want to be or should be based on feedback that we heard from the community and our stakeholders. So before I delve into that, I want to do a quick overview in terms of those particular elements and the specific examples that they're part of or they encompass. So the paths, we're talking about pedestrian and bike trails, dark transit lines, railways, interstate corridors, and complete streets. So within the paths that we have for Fort Dallas, one thing that we've done is make sure that we are aligning the complete streets that are defined by our transportation department with the land uses that are defined from our place types. So that's going to be something that you see in the next few slides. Districts, like we mentioned, conservation and historic districts are the few that we'll be using to show or identify certain unique districts that are in addition to the place types that we see in the city. Landmarks, features, and gateways. They have two different scales that could be shown within Fort Dallas, more regional, that's the nature of Fort Dallas, and certain local ones that still have a regional draw throughout the city. Nodes, they include transit nodes, transit centers, transit stations, and then neighborhood centers like Rick mentioned. And then lastly, our natural features, that includes parks, the floodplain, and escarpment. So the suite of urban design elements in what's the word I'm thinking of? In combination with the place types, they'll help to define and help emphasize the land use vision within different parts of the city that we've heard from the community. So on the screen, we're showing an example of a particular part of the city just for legibility within Fort Dallas. This is going to be something that's shown through a city-wide map, but for legibility, we're kind of focusing on one particular area of the city. And what we're doing, we're showing a place type map on one side and the urban design framework map on the other side. And what they're supposed to do is speak to each other and help to emphasize certain aspects of what's happening from a land use perspective and what we want to emphasize through the urban design framework. So for example, as we look at the place type map on the left, we see that it's a predominantly residential area with a few red commercial nodes that exist. As we look into the urban design framework map on the right, we can start to understand how different landmarks, gateways, parks contribute to where those particular land uses exist in the city, in this particular example in North Dallas. So what we're wanting to do with the urban design framework map And the place type map is to help tell a better story as to not just the land uses that exist, but how people get to those particular land uses, the certain landmarks and identifiable objects and places that exist, and how people traverse in and out of the particular spaces that exist within different parts of the city of Dallas. So what we want to show here is basically the application of urban design and those elements into or with a place type map. One thing that's not as legible here are the streets that we have identified in the urban design framework map. Those are in blue, and the different typologies of complete streets tie into the types of place types that we have on the left side with the place type map. So the idea is to, as you look at both maps and both graphics, they help to emphasize what the vision for not just land use, but transportation into those land uses should and could be based on the feedback that we've gotten from the community, stakeholders, and other departments and their initiative as well. So with that, I'm going to kind of pause, and I know a lot to absorb in what we just talked about. We're going to go back to kind of the earlier part of the discussion, and we can kind of just kind of piecemeal and talk through those different elements. So I know we started with the implementation and the strategies. We then delved into the elements and the urban design components that build and help to kind of fashion the urban design framework, and then the example of how we'd like to use that framework with Forward Dallas and land use.
Thank you, Mr. Agu. I see Mr. Cannon has some questions. So.
Yeah, so first off, I could hardly see in those two images. Could you go back to those two maps? I'm just going to, I guess one question is there a printed copy? Then also, can we have just a moment just to look at these on a larger screen? Because it's really small. Yeah, it's.
Are you able to zoom in?
Can you identify the location? I mean, I know it's North Dallas, but where? I mean,
You say that again? Sorry.
Pardon?
Oh, the
Looks
area
like
that we're showing,
North
an
Park
example?
Mall. It's the area by the JCC, correct?
It's
you
by
repeat that?
North Park Mall on one side. It's basically Northwest Highway north all the way to almost 635.
Yes, the area.
On the east
75
side.
in the toll road, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so the area bounded by highway, Northwest Highway to the south, Dallas North Tollway to the west, LBJ 635 to the north, and Highway 75 to the east. So again, this is just for legibility. I guess the screens that you have is not as legible as we thought, but the idea is to kind of zoom in and kind of talk through how the urban design land use components work together. But I'm not sure if y'all wanted to either move or I can print out some. Is that, yeah.
Lawrence, can you zoom in on
Let me
each of
try.
those, possibly?
Oh, actually I can. Okay.
There we go.
All right, I can do that.
That's helpful, thank you.
Right, so districts that we're showing here, they represent the districts that we use during our engagement process and throughout the city, just to talk through the place types and the different components within each district. So we're using those same districts as an example, just to be able to understand how the place types apply with the urban design framework. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom in for those who are online on this particular example. Let me slowly zoom out. So right here, what we have is a map that shows, one in blue, the complete streets, the different typologies. So the dash that we have on the northeast corner, that represents more pedestrian paths, and those are usually by more mixed use type of development. We also have commercial and residential corridors that are also identified. Let me just show you all a quick legend. This is just for context, but the different types of complete streets that exist are commercial, industrial, residential, parkways, and mixed use, and those apply and coincide with the future place types that we have in the city as well. All right.
Hey, Lawrence, what are the, I guess those are node symbols, the three of them up in the northern quadrant?
Oh, the stars?
Yes.
Yeah, so those would be examples of landmarks that exist in the city. So right now, as we're just looking at the working draft, getting feedback from our consultants and community stakeholders in terms of what those particular landmarks could or should be. And the purpose of that is just to kind of help identify and orient users as to where they are in a particular part of the town.
They're kind of, the landmarks are really kind of significant architectural buildings or groups of buildings that, you know, can either be at a regional scale or a neighborhood scale, and that is determined by the size of the asterisk.
So this is going to sound depressing, but I grew up in this area. I probably couldn't tell you what the towers at Park Central are, but I could tell you that they're not too far away from the Costco. So in terms of utility, you know, I don't know if referencing big box stores might be useful, although it's kind of, you know, it may say something else about, you know, how our city operates.
Right, and I think two things I'm probably going to go after I go. So what we're kind of showing here are, in a sense, existing conditions of what exists. As we continue to develop and talk through this, especially with our urban design peer review panel, which is going to follow next month, there might be opportunities or discussions about where could potential future nodes, landmarks, et cetera, go or should be as we think through each of these parts of the city. Like you mentioned, like Costco or Sam's might not be the best in a particular part of town, but that might be all that somebody has or an area has. So we want to make sure that comprehensively the city has, particularly a good grouping and spreading of these landmarks and assets that helps to identify these communities at large. That's a good point.
Mr. Yarborough.
I guess my question is kind of online with that, because my first question was like, well, who defined these as landmarks within the neighborhood, and was that process part of the public engagement process, and these were identified by the neighborhoods?
So it's kind of twofold. So from our initial community engagement that we had a year ago, in terms of identifying certain assets or opportunities that existed, we used that as kind of the baseline to kind of start to collect what those should be. Then our consultant used that data and their knowledge locally to start to identify what those existing assets could or should be. What we want to do is start to kind of put some of those general ideas and concept that we heard from the community and from our consultant on the map and start to see if that helps to kind of tell the story, help the story with the land use component as well.
Perfect. And would the hope be as part of, this framework map, because it tells a very different story than the place type map does, is the hope to use the framework map and have guidance within the urban design framework to be able to identify gaps and to then work to rectify those gaps as you move forward?
Exactly. So as we look at kind of land use, I'm just going to switch back, and that's a great question. As we look at the land use map that we have on the left, we can see by the colors of the red nodes, for example, where the particular clustering of a particular commercial center could or should is currently on the map. But what this doesn't tell is how do people get there? What's the best way for this particular area? What's a gateway to this particular node? So I think the urban design framework is to help with understanding how those land uses should function. In addition to thinking through if there are any gaps in terms of how people get there, looking at all different modes of transportation, where could those opportunities to improve that, where should that be located? Good question.
Awesome, thank you.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yeah, I'm having a difficulty with just basic terminology of, the urban design elements, because when I think of urban design, sitting on the Plan Commission, I'm thinking about how buildings, where they are in relation to the street, how wide the sidewalks are, how the heights are sensitive. So can you kind of get me to orient my mind in the right direction? Because this isn't what this is talking about at all.
Yeah, no doubt. So two things. So when we talk about kind of urban design elements, as we are basically trying to set the groundwork for a citywide urban design guidelines that could happen post for Dallas. So what this is doing is setting the groundwork in terms of common urban design kind of concepts and topics and places to understand where holes are, where things are currently existing, and how that ties into the land use that exists. So kind of the principles in general is what these elements are trying to do. Secondly, with the place type descriptions, we're also going to have a component of each place type descriptions that talks about general setbacks, heights, etc., and tying in some of those elements specific to the lane, specific to the place types in those descriptions. So this is going to be basically a suite of tools and concepts that we use throughout the entirety of the document to help with that. And what we want to do is make sure there's a baseline understanding and description of those elements as we use them throughout the different parts of the plan. I know Rick, you might have something too.
And I would probably add to that by just saying the core urban design components that I think you're really talking about are edges, which are how components such as landmarks and streets all come together adjacent to place types and or land uses. And as Lawrence mentioned, the edges are going to be vitally important, and we'll be talking about those within the document as far as what the relationship between these different levels of complete streets and the place types that are adjacent to it, and what that building relationship to public sector path or mobility component in that future and or existing land use or place type.
Right, these elements of urban design that are laid out, the past district landmarks, nodes, and natural features, I mean, they're kind of, high level. And when it talks about applying these urban design standards for things like plats, I'm completely lost.
Right, so I think going back to the different parts of the presentation, the first part that you just mentioned about how does urban design, how does that get used with review of plats? So that's one. Let's go back to that particular section so we're not talking about the same thing. So when we are talking about kind of urban design, we talked about two different things, actually three different things in today's discussion. One, the implementation strategy. What are some of those objectives that we see need to happen post for Dallas to help to push urban design standards in the city? One of those is developing a comprehensive urban design guidelines, and then being able to use those to review plats, rezoning, and development cases, which we currently don't have in the city. So the idea of that particular item that you mentioned is to help with that reviewing of cases instead of staff having to rely on best practices or institutional knowledge, having something that's kind of written in stone and that's clear for everybody who comes in to review those types of cases, just to make sure there's a consistent way of reviewing those cases in the city.
So if you're talking about modifying the underlying development code that then would come into play with a platting case because they have to comply with the zoning, and you're talking about a comprehensive set for the city, I can understand that to an extent when you're talking about a mixed-use neighborhood or something. But when you have, say, industrial areas or the rural residential, we're talking about how does one set of design standards, you've got a concrete crushing plant. The typical urban design standards, are not.
So when we say urban design standards, think similar to like comprehensive plan. So we have one comprehensive plan that touches on different types of land uses. What we're talking about with the urban design standards is having a set of standards that talk about different types of zoning and different types of places that exist. How do you apply pedestrian connectivity in industrial areas versus mixed use areas versus single family areas? Having some type of urban design framework that helps to kind of clarify what that looks like is what we're talking through.
Hey, Lawrence, and this might be because I'm not seeing the plan real clearly, but in the framework plan, if you could go back to that for a second, what I think is the North Haven Trail path is real clearly showed, which is wonderful. I think that should definitely be part of our framework. Is the DART rail kind of cut through here? And it seems like that should also be a major pathway that we would want to locate. And I might be missing it.
So for which line are you talking through?
Is DART shown on here?
So for this particular section, I don't believe there's a DART line that goes
There's no
through
line
here.
through here. Okay,
Right.
to the east.
What about DART? I mean, bus routes change, but is that something that would ideally be incorporated into
Yes,
this?
so a few things and how we kind of looked at this. Because we're looking at the kind of citywide scale, when we start to identify all types of transit, I think it became a bit messy from the citywide scale in terms of the priority of those areas. So we definitely looked at one, transit lines, and then two high capacity bus lines. So for this particular section, that doesn't exist in terms of what it's currently showing, but I think in terms of the future, if there is, as we have conversations with you all, the community, and UDPRP, if there are ideas that certain corridors should be a high capacity corridor, we want to start to identify that as well on this map, because again, going back to the purpose of for Dallas is a future kind of setting type of document. So we want to start to kind of just build on top of this plan in terms of what would we like to see those particular corridors emphasized, and we're having conversations with DART to help with that as well.
So what parts, and I guess we're kind of in an area of the haves looking at this part of North Dallas for the most part, but a lot of this on the map on the right seems to reflect existing conditions. Is there anything that's a suggestion for how to move forward in these areas? Because I'm pretty familiar with this, and it seems to just reflect what's on the ground today.
Exactly. So what we're showing, like I mentioned before, is kind of existing conditions, and what we want to talk about today is those suite of tools those suite of elements that we're using, and we're talking about. Are there any additional things that need to be added or thought through as we start having conversations about what the future of these areas should be or incorporate? So I think as we talk through certain future potential future elements and where those exist, there's going to be continued community engagement and discussions with DART and other stakeholders to help identify those. But right now we haven't gotten into developing that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
When do we foresee that piece of it coming? I mean, we've, have a draft map, we have draft place types. It seems like this is not any knock against y'all have a lot of work to do, but it seems like this is a step behind.
Right, so I think two things. So one, as we look at the future place type map, again, the idea is to help emphasize what the future place type map is telling us. So that's the core of this plan, is the future land use. The urban design component is to help just emphasize that. But as we build and talk through what future land uses exist, there might be some areas in the city that the land uses that we're suggesting, we need to understand what that looks like from an urban design perspective. So the conversations that we're going to be having the next few months is to help to develop or think through what additional assets from an urban design perspective can help to emphasize those future land uses that we're looking to develop.
Mr. Yarborough?
So the future land use will be the gap analysis that will set the bar for how the urban design framework needs to move forward. Am I understanding that correctly?
It could. So I think you can go both ways. So if we're looking at the place type map on this particular example, so we have the node in red. I'm going to zoom in here, for example. So say this area was before this was just residential, for example, and we've identified this as being a node. What we want to do too is, as we go into the urban design framework, being able to understand what types of corridors exist that would help to emphasize that particular node. It might be currently a residential corridor, but it might need to be something that's a little bit more higher capacity to align with the transportation and how land uses kind of coincide. So that's one way of looking at it. We can also look at it from the kind of the reverse aspect as we are looking at these urban design elements on this map. It might tell us a different story. We haven't seen that yet, that maybe the land use component should be tweaked or investigated in a deeper dive post-4 Dallas to elaborate on what a particular neighborhood is wanting to be. So it can go either way, but for the most part, it's going to be the place type is driving, and then urban design helps support.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter?
You refer several times to existing urban design resources, and I'm thinking of Complete Streets Manual and Article 10, maybe. What else are you thinking
The
of?
TIF design guidelines that we have as well. DART has their own TOD design guidelines, so within the City of Dallas, being able to use those as well. So there are a few piecemeal urban design guidance that we have, but nothing that's comprehensive in nature.
Okay, I have another question about, say, like districts. The definition seems to be, or the examples seem to be pretty narrow, historic districts and conservation districts. Like where does, say, Bishop Arts or Lower Greenville Avenue fall in here? Is it a node or is it a district? And so, or neighborhoods like Bluffview or Preston Hollow or Lakewood or something that aren't necessarily designated historic or conservation districts, but I think to most people, if you say Lakewood, they have a pretty good idea of what you're talking about, where it is and what the the appearance is.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think as our teams are talking through all the different types of districts that could exist in the city, what we're also looking at is the scale of these districts. Some of these districts are actually smaller in nature, and they're more of a neighborhood type of scale. And when we start to identify those on a comprehensive map, the map actually becomes very busy and hard to distinguish between what we're trying to show from the citywide comprehensive nature. So as we delve into neighborhood plans that will, neighborhood plans that exist or get developed post-4 Dallas, those are going to be where you start to see those manifest themselves more. Those that exist on these maps, as we have for future conversations, will be ones that can be easily identifiable from a more macro level. But as we delve into the more specific area plans, neighborhood plans, post-4 Dallas, those will start to manifest themselves as well there.
Okay. Because some things seem to fall, say that if you take Fair Park, it kind of falls into all the categories. Or White Rock Lake, you can say, well, it's ecological, but it's kind of man-made. It's a destination place. It's a pathway. It's all kinds of things. But is it your intention, though, primarily for districts to be residential?
Not necessarily. So
Okay.
the different types of districts, depending on the different types of uses that exist. So, so no, that's not our.
Okay, because as we've been moving along through this process, looking at the place types and all, I'm having trouble placing the entertainment districts, because it seems to me that we have, entertainment districts, Lower Greenville, Bishop Arts, Design District, Deep Ellum, they have a character that is somewhat similar to some of the existing place types, but becoming an entertainment district seems to move you into a whole different category. So,
yeah, it's actually a good question. So the entertainment districts that we have in the city, they could change depending on the grouping or the combination of different cultures that exist. But what we want to do with 4 Dallas is make sure that the land uses allow for that opportunity for those different types of entertainment districts. So one entertainment district could look totally different a few years from now or decades from now, depending on the ethnicity, culture, the grouping of people that exist there. But what we want to do is make sure that we provide the suitable land uses that would allow for any type of entertainment district that the community would like to see in a particular area.
it just seems like there's kind of a natural evolution that they say, it's like Bishop Arts or even Lower Greenville. They start out as the neighborhood commercial, is that the place type? But then once they evolve to a certain, point of being an entertainment destination, they've really morphed into a different category. So,
yeah, that's also the point and the purpose of the engagement that we're having with the place type maps and the discussion about what the community would like to see in their area. So there could be areas that have that designation as neighborhood commercial, and the community would like it to be that vibrant type of community. I want to be able to afford that opportunity within how we're identifying and talking through these place types in the city. But also, too, there might be some areas that don't want that type of feel in their area. I want to make sure that we identify that as two in the descriptions and how the area gets developed too.
I was going to make the same point, because say, the cases we've heard, like the Garden Cafe over in Junius Heights, they do not, and in North Oak Cliff, what we hear is not Bishop Arts. It's like, remember the Alamo, not Bishop Arts is what, people
Definitely.
want. So I don't know if there's a way to
Yeah, so what we
distinct.
actually, that's a great point. So that was actually a purpose of the districts, kind of focusing on the conservation and historic districts. So a lot of communities that live or are part of those neighborhoods would like to kind of maintain the particular feel and culture that they have within those districts. So having that as part of the urban design framework helps to clarify that this particular area, although it might be by a neighborhood corridor or node, is still wanting to be this particular type of conservation and historic district. So that's kind of the purpose too, is make sure that when we look at the place type map and we look back at the urban design framework, we can understand that, this particular area that is within this historic district, conservation district, would like to maintain its integrity and character, in addition to what the future land use is showing on here. So basically adds another layer of information as staff, the community developers look at what's the desire is for the future land use. They can understand what the community would like to see from looking at the different elements of the framework.
One last point, but what I'm also seeing is there are neighborhoods that really don't meet the standards for historic or conservation districts, but still have that same desire that the people who live in those districts that qualify or can do the process, whatever. So it seems to me there needs to be some consideration there.
Right, and just like every other plan that we have in the city, there's going to be opportunities to amend the plan if needed, to update or make sure that we're reflecting the most current feedback from the community. So if there is a particular area that does become a historic district or conservation district, that can be added and amended and brought up to date to reflect that character.
I think we have some folks online with questions or comments. Ms. Milligan?
Thanks. I have two questions. One regarding landmarks. I think you mentioned that the landmarks at this point have been identified, and it was primarily through or partially through asking community members about assets. But since this is both an aspirational document, but a document that's recognizing existing conditions, can you talk to us about how you'll treat, I guess what I would say would be less desirable or negative, but nevertheless landmarks in a community? I think even within this example that we're looking at right now, just north of it would be, until very recently, the decimated hulk of Valley View Mall. But so can you talk to us a little bit, but it could be, an abandoned industrial site. It could be, heavy industry that is part of a community, and whether we like it or not is a landmark within the community. And as we think about aspirations, that could be something that you'd want to identify as, changing that landmark from a negative landmark to something that could be redeveloped into something positive for the community. So can you talk to us about identifying those landmarks that are not assets?
Right. So I think through our engagement, there are a few things that came up. One, those particular existing landmarks that people wanted to maintain and keep. Those are the ones that we've identified and start to build upon. You also talked about negative landmarks and those kind of items that exist. Those are, kind of, as we heard through the future land uses and place types that we have in the city. Those have been areas that could change from a land use perspective in terms of what a new landmark could or should be. We didn't get that feedback, but the feedback was, hey, this could be a potential to do X, Y, and Z from a land use perspective, and that's how we've used that feedback. So this shows certain assets and aspects that community would like to maintain, and from a future land use perspective, with areas that could be or either blighted, like you mentioned, or negative in terms of nature from a landmark perspective. Future land uses were proposed through community engagement, and that's what we see on the future land use map.
So I would just push you on that I think the future land uses don't necessarily acknowledge the existing condition that may be negatively impacting a community. So if there's a way, and maybe it's not through a designation of a landmark, but I think to recognize some of the negative influences in a neighborhood, again, so that there is that connection between that aspirational future land use and when that aspiration, as we're thinking about implementation, when that aspiration is actually achieved, I think it gives you an easier way to acknowledge that you've achieved one of your goals. My second question was about nodes, and I think this is where deep community engagement would be needed, and just wanted to hear a little bit more from you because I think in a lot of communities you may have really informal nodes, whether it is one park that is more greatly utilized because there isn't a recreation center, or even, I mean, thinking about the Juanita Craft House at one point, when she was alive, that was a community node, right? So how will those informal community nodes be identified, if at all?
Right, and I think I'm going to talk through kind of going back to the scale component of Forward Dallas. So through the community engagement, there are a bunch of feedback in terms of certain either aspects, elements, parts of a community that could be a node or emphasized. Those are all elements that we've looked at and reviewed. When we're looking at the city of Dallas as a whole, looking at a citywide comprehensive plan or map, being able to identify those easily was also another component of what we're looking at. So in terms of scale, there might be certain aspects or certain, elements that don't fit within the comprehensive nature of Forward Dallas, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be part of a neighborhood plan or developed post Forward Dallas to help emphasize those more nuanced or specific, I forgot how you mentioned it, informal types of nodes that exist in the city that maybe just a community might know about, but might not be as recognizable citywide.
Thanks.
Anyone else online have questions or comments?
Yes, this is Linda McMahon. I don't really want to go into a full discussion about this, but I just want to mention that I'd really like to dig into what you're talking about, urban design criteria and guidelines, and exactly what that means. And then when you're considering that DART has their own design guidelines and all these different entities have different guidelines, at some point we're going to have to really look at all of that process, because that will be very concerning to the people that I represent.
Yes, and I think maybe to clarify too, so as we talk about future urban design guidelines, that's likely going to be a future kind of project or something that gets contracted or publicized to help the city define that for the future, similar to what we did for Dallas and our zoning code reform update. That's going to be another project that happens post Forward Dallas to define a comprehensive guidance for the city that's outside the scope of Forward Dallas. So Forward Dallas, what we're doing with identifying these particular elements and these particular strategies is kind of setting the baseline in terms of general principles that should exist through the place types, through these elements, and then built upon with a future more robust set of guidelines that will be developed post Forward Dallas.
And then appreciate that. And the only other comment I want to also make relating to those urban design standards is I really am hopeful that when you all start really publishing this will move the city forward and creating more opportunities for complete streets, particularly in those neighborhoods.
Would you mind repeating what you just? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you well.
So, sorry. I'm just saying that when you get into, my hope is that when you develop these urban design standards, that this will also motivate the city towards creating more opportunities for complete streets within communities, particularly those in Southern Dallas, because, it's been a lot of work for us to try to get the city to adopt some kind of methodology around Martin Boulevard, for example. And while we've gotten some preliminary funding to do some preliminary studies, it's really difficult to get the transportation department to change traffic patterns in residential neighborhoods. And it's not, so just a point that I want to make sure that captured at some level.
Right, and I agree 100%. I think what we've done with the urban design guidelines is actually we've incorporated the citywide complete streets into that map or into that the plan. So as we look at the future place types and the complete streets that exist, those again setting the baseline of how those two should work together. So as we look at more nuanced areas in the city, like you mentioned, South Dallas, Southern Dallas, using these set of general principles and guidelines and land use direction, we can start to understand how those two should work together as we develop more defined and specific guidance and development in those areas. So good point.
I'm having a few issues with my device. Does anyone else online have questions, comments? All right. I'll follow up with a question or two, Mr. Gu and Mr. Leisner. So I guess I think in code, since I sit on the City Plan Commission, I realize that not every, urban design element ultimately has its endpoint in code. There's certainly things that are more suggestions, and then there are things, as the slide deck acknowledges, that will ultimately end up in the development code. I'm not asking you for a comprehensive list of things that go from urban design to the development code at this point, but can you just give me an example of something that y'all, not asking you to commit to something hard, saying, this is exactly how something needs to be drafted, but just an example or two of how an urban design element might be implemented into the development code, either 51A or 51B.
Right, so an example, as we do like our development review, when we see, say, an abandonment case, that comes through and creates a mega block of a particular part of the city, there isn't a specific item that says blocks should be X and Y and Z in terms of perimeter. We use our general best practices to kind of be able to understand that if we do abandon a particular corridor, that could create a mega block and help or hinder pedestrian connectivity to certain parts of the city. So those are certain things that could be kind of elaborated upon within code or some other type of urban design guidelines or guidance that would help staff not have to kind of just rely on institutional knowledge, but something that's a little bit more concrete, and having that to provide to the applicant that says in this particular part of the code, make sure you apply to this particular type of development, X, Y, and Z. So that's kind of the one example that we kind of see actually often, that we don't have that particular type of line on the code to kind of refer to. It's more about kind of general guidance that we as planners and urban designers kind of relate to.
Lawrence, one thing that I would maybe add to that, we were talking about it just prior to this presentation today, is developments and place types that front on trails and everything. There needs to be a very strong connectivity to those trails, and that's something that clearly could be codified to make sure that there are those types of linkages to all land uses, place types adjacent to public trails.
Great, thank you so much. Anyone else have questions, comments for staff? All right, I think we're through that in record time today. Minutes are not ready from, by the way, thank you, Mr. Gu, Mr. Leisner, for a really great presentation, as always. We don't have minutes today to approve. They're still in the works, so we'll take those up at our next meeting. And I think that completes our agenda. So it is 9:33 a.m., believe it or not. Yes.
Before we do close, I just want to maybe give a quick kind of overview in terms of what's going to happen next. So we just talked through an example of one particular area in the city. What we're going to do, we're going to be sending you all the material that we just presented, and also to other areas in the city, and those examples of how the urban design framework jives with the land use place type map. So again, precursors to kind of showing you all the draft plan, and the draft plan is going to basically have that citywide urban design structure, and the citywide place type map. So you'll be able to kind of understand how those relate to each other. You all will be getting that to review as well as homework as we continue developing and building toward a draft plan by end of the month. So with that too, as we continue to send you all materials, just because I think we're getting a few different feedback, we might be extending that review homework period by another week, just to kind of allow you all to review the additional content coming this week. So this is just more an FYI for the body here. And as a reminder, so the idea is by late July, early August, we'll have a draft plan before you all to review, which will basically package everything that we've talked about, makes from a year of development into one package. So you can review the implementation items, the place type descriptions, the place types in terms of geographic form, and in the implementation matrix and how we're going to be hopefully getting those items actually actualized. So that's going to be what we're going to be doing in the next month. And also too, in the months of August and September, our public comment period will also be initiated and start. And that's going to be an opportunity for the public to also provide that feedback as we're getting feedback from you all as well. So just want to basically do a quick reminder of the next few months that we have with this plan and working toward getting a draft to you all to review.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gu. Any questions on that? All right, seeing none, it is 9:36 a.m. and the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee meeting is adjourned. Thanks so much.
Thank you.